Hello viewers, I'm your host Uzma Jaffrey with another episode of South Asia Focus. US Defense Secretary James Mattis was on a visit to New Delhi where he pitched for greater defense cooperation between the two countries. Concerned over the security situation in Afghanistan, Mattis discussed the entire gamut of bilateral issues with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Defense Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. We have a report.
Washington is keen to deepen defense ties and enhance trade and technology cooperation with New Delhi. James Mattis's recent visit to India was aimed at expanding maritime security engagement amid China's growing aggression in South China Sea. He met Indian Defense Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and expressed interest in deepening the trade and technology collaborations under the Make in India framework. In what could be termed as substantive and constructive talks, Mattis reiterated that there can be no tolerance for terrorist safe havens and pledged to work together with India to end the scourge.
As we work to strengthen our defense relationship, we seek to expand our cooperation in building partnerships also across the region. In particular, we applaud India's invaluable contributions to Afghanistan and welcome further efforts to promote Afghanistan's democracy, stability, and security. Our two countries recognize the threat that global terrorism poses to people throughout the world. There can be no tolerance of terrorist safe havens. As global leaders, India and the United States resolve to work together to eradicate this scourge.
Mattis and Sitharaman also talked on the situation in the South Asian region and the growing menace of cross-border terrorism. Meanwhile, Sitharaman reiterated that India would continue to provide medical and developmental assistance to Afghanistan but will not deploy troops.
And we shall expand if necessary. However, of course, we've made it very clear that there shall not be boots from India on the ground.
Mattis also met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and briefed him on the progress in advancing the bilateral agenda and implementing the decisions taken during his visit to the United States. PM Modi appreciated the close engagement between India and the US on regional and global issues of mutual concern.
After his successful visit to New Delhi, US Defense Secretary James Mattis visited Kabul to pledge support for the government of President Ashraf Ghani with the precarious security in the Afghan capital underlined by an attack on the airport hours after he touched down.
An attack at the Kabul airport just hours after US Defense Secretary James Mattis' arrival in Afghanistan to pledge support for the government of President Ashraf Ghani. Video released by Islamic State media claiming to show one of its militants firing a missile at Kabul airport. Yet the attack, which wounded several civilians, was claimed by both Islamic State and Taliban insurgents. Mattis condemned the attack as a criminal act by terrorists. The Secretary of Defense appearing with President Ashraf Ghani and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg to hammer out a new strategy in Afghanistan.
I want to reinforce to the Taliban that the only path to peace and political legitimacy for them is through a negotiated settlement. We welcome those who commit to a peaceful future for Afghanistan. We support Afghan-led reconciliation as the solution to this conflict, and the sooner the Taliban recognizes they cannot win with bombs, the sooner the killing will end.
As part of the new US strategy, which will give US commanders great freedom to use American firepower against the Taliban, Mattis has said the United States will send an additional 3,000 troops to help train Afghan security forces, which are focusing on building up the Air Force and Special Forces. Afghan president also reiterated that dialogue will bring peace and Afghan soil will not be used for any terror activities.
We need to all recognize that a stable Afghanistan is in everybody's benefit, and Afghanistan can become the platform for regional cooperation. Afghan territory will not be permitted to be used for destabilization of any of our neighbors, and this is a cardinal principle with us. We do not differentiate between good and bad terrorism and do not engage in destabilizing our neighbors.
The United States and Afghanistan wish India to play a major role in bringing peace and development in the war-torn nation. Afghanistan's chief executive, Abdullah, also visited New Delhi and met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj to enhance bilateral ties. The visit assumes significance after US President Donald Trump sought India's help to develop Afghanistan, ravaged by years of war between Taliban and US-led forces. India has played a significant role in the reconstruction and rehabilitation of Afghanistan. According to the Indian Foreign Ministry, India's extensive developmental assistance program for Afghanistan now stands at around $2 billion.
Relations between Afghanistan and India received a major boost in 2011 with the signing of a strategic partnership agreement, Afghanistan's first since the Soviet invasion of 1979. Moving on, let's talk about Pakistan, which was slammed by India, Afghanistan and Bangladesh for its long existing policy of supporting and providing shelters to terrorists at the United Nations General Assembly. Pakistan was also cornered by its own people who have been at the receiving end of the state-sponsored atrocities and Islamabad's high-handedness.
भारत और पाकिस्तान साथ-साथ आजाद हुए। भारत की पहचान एक आईटी के सुपर पावर के रूप में बनी है। पाकिस्तान की पहचान एक आतंकवादी देश के रूप में बनी है।
South Asian countries have long been victims of terrorism sponsored by Pakistan. At the General Assembly of the United Nations in New York, the South Asian nations slammed Pakistan for harboring terrorists and asked the world to curb the menace. India, which has been suffering from terrorism being exported from across the border, lambasted Islamabad of backing anti-India militant outfits and helping them to infiltrate in its Jammu and Kashmir state to stoke violence and carry out terrorist acts. India's External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj gave a befitting reply to Pakistan as the country which stands exposed globally for its role in nurturing terrorism.
जिस समय वो बोल रहे थे तो सुनने वाले कह रहे थे लुक हु इज टॉकिंग। जो मुल्क हैवानियत की हदें पार करके सैकड़ों बेगुनाहों को मौत के घाट उतरवाता है, वो यहाँ खड़ा होकर हमें इंसानियत का सबक सिखा रहा था, हमें मानवाधिकार का पाठ पढ़ा रहा था। भारत और पाकिस्तान साथ-साथ आजाद हुए थे, लेकिन आज भारत की पहचान दुनिया भर में एक आईटी के सुपर पावर के रूप में बनी है और पाकिस्तान की पहचान एक दहशतगर्द मुल्क, एक आतंकवादी देश के रूप में बनी है।
It was not just India but Afghanistan also indirectly mentioned the role of Pakistan in spreading terrorism. Afghan President Ashraf Ghani urged Pakistan to engage in dialogue with the Taliban.
Today, these very freedoms are under attack from global terrorism. Terrorism is not only an attack on human life in basic freedoms, but an attack on the compact of citizenship, an attack on the nation-state's relationship with its people, which makes democratic societies unique, fair, and free. We must confront the threat of terrorism as a united force and meet it with a long-term solution that matches the long-term agenda of the terrorists themselves.
The Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, while expressing her deep concerns at the scourge of terrorism, asserted on the immediate need of the extraordinary steps required to curb the menace of terrorism to bring peace, stability and development. Slamming Pakistan for what it did before the formation of Bangladesh, she said, in 1971, 3 million innocents were killed and more than 200,000 women violated when the Pakistan Army launched heinous Operation Searchlight on March 25. On the sidelines of UNGA, several anti-Pakistan protests were held by oppressed people from Pakistan. Muhajirs who moved to Pakistan from India in 1947 were seen holding placards and posters raising slogans to voice their anger against the human rights violation by Pakistani government and its army.
जुल्म हो रहा है कराची के अंदर महाजिरों के साथ, वो जो हिंदुस्तान से 47 में आ गए थे यहाँ पे, जिन्होंने पाकिस्तान बनाया था, उनके साथ नाइंसाफ़ी हो रही है और डिमांड यही है कि फ़ौज ज़्यादती कर रही है, उस फ़ौज के ऊपर दुनिया मिल के पाबंदी लगाए। ये पूरी दुनिया में दहशतगर्दी कर रही है ये मजहबी जुनूनियों को पाल रही है।
हमारी डिमांड ये कि हमें पाकिस्तानी आर्मी के ऊपर बैन लगाया जाए, पाकिस्तानी हुकूमत के ऊपर बैन लगाया जाए। ये लोग तालिबान को पाल रहे हैं, ये लोग टेररिज्म को पाल रहे हैं, ये पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी टेररिज्म कर रहे हैं, ये इंडिया में भी कर रहे हैं, कश्मीर में भी कर रहे हैं, ईरान में भी, अफगानिस्तान में भी, बलूचिस्तान में लोगों को मार रहे हैं। लोगों को बहुत बड़ी तादाद में हिंदू जो हैं वो पाकिस्तान से माइग्रेशन कर रहे हैं।
Multiple organizations representing various societies and ethnicities of Pakistan, including Baloch, Sindhis and the people from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, have repeatedly asked for international support against Pakistan's brutality in the region.
Even most trustworthy allies and so-called all-weather friends of Pakistan have expressed concerns over Pakistan's direct involvement in providing patronage to terrorists. Now let's talk about the grave human rights situation in Pakistan's Sindh province. An increase in disappearances of political activists and Sindhi intellectuals by Pakistani security forces was recently discussed at the 36th session of Human Rights Council in Geneva. We have a report.
Pakistan release! Pakistan release!
Armed with placards of victims of enforced disappearances, Sindhi human rights activists raised anti-Pakistan slogans outside the United Nations to demand justice. They seek intervention of human rights organizations for the release of political and human rights activists missing from Pakistan's Sindh province. The protesters allege Pakistan's inter-services intelligence, military intelligence and rangers are behind the abduction, torture and killing of these activists.
There is a huge surge of disappearances in Sindh. Any activist who raised their voice for the protection of Sindhi or Sindhi rights has been disappeared. Any sane person who raises its voice against these atrocities, including nowadays in the name of the CPEC, they are thinking that Sindhis are against the CPEC and there is a huge surge of disappearances. Let's see this person who is a Punhal Sario. He himself has been disappeared. His crime is that he was raising voice for the disappeared Sindhi people.
Sindhi political activists have informed the United Nations about the plight of the people in Sindh. Over 1,000 cases of missing persons in Sindh have been reported since 2010. The numbers has increased significantly in the recent years.
The enforced disappearances have been an ongoing practice in Sindh for last several years. Over 1,200 cases of missing persons in Sindh have been reported since 2010. In recent months, there has been a resurgence of enforced disappearances throughout Sindh. Since February 2017, over 160 political, human rights and civil society activists have gone missing, including Khadim Arijo, Hidayat Lohar, Murtaza Junejo, Bilal Chandio, Gulsher Tagar, Insaf Dayo, Saif Jatoi and others.
Not only are the Sindhi activists being targeted, but the locals also fear of losing their identity, culture and language as the Chinese have entered their territory to build China-Pakistan economic corridor. The locals blame Pakistan and China of economic exploitation by acquiring farming land, ports and other areas to build CPAC-related projects.
The current situation in Pakistan's Sindh province is appalling. My colleague Ravi Khandelwal spoke to Dr. Rubina Sheikh, chairwoman of World Sindhi Congress.
The issues of Sindh are being raised at the United Nations on several platforms. There were protests, there were some interventions, there were some side events as well. So what is the real situation in Sindh, because we have seen there are a lot of issues related to enforced disappearances of political activists.
There are at the moment fundamentally actually quite three key category issues I would point out. One is when people are talking about their rights, so for example Sindhis are talking about their right of govern, right of culture, right of politics, or right of civil rights, they're being suppressed. And also right of the religious practices as well. So these are the key really fundamental issues. And hence what we are seeing it is the enforced disappearance. So political activists are kidnapped, taken away, tortured and killed, and their bodies are dumped. Minorities are being harassed day by day, and actually I would call it as a call cultural genocide, especially attack on the Hindu Sindhis, which we consider is a key fundamental part of Sindhi culture, is Hindu Sindhis, because they are actually leading our Sindh's culture in a more sort of Sufist way, more secularist way.
The political activists, those who are raising the voice against the atrocities by Pakistan, like the recent incident of Pulhan Sario, he has been kidnapped.
Yes.
So how they are targeting the political activists?
Well, this is one of the key to suppress the voice of our political activists and journalists, actually. I mean, it's more than 160 political activists or human rights activists, I would say. I think really we shouldn't be calling them political activists. They are human rights activists who are talking about the issues of education, issues of the livelihood of the Sindhi people are being taken away. Now, this is only from February 2017, but we must not forget that enforced disappearance and kidnapping of human rights activists and journalists in Sindh is long story. It's going in last 10, 15, 20 years. You saw the rise in 2012 to 14. We had another more than 300 people were kidnapped, and out of Muzaffar Bhutto and all these dead bodies we received in our homeland. So I think this is about a time that when we are actually, we have no hope in Pakistan, and I really urge international communities and our neighboring countries to really support, at least on human rights issues, which is a really crux of the human survival in this world, actually.
Now the China is entering in Pakistan and including Sindh as well.
Yes.
So what impact will it make on the cultural, religious and other diversities of Sindh and other region of Pakistan?
I think I raised earlier the point as the CPEC type of project, or CPEC itself is such a mega project, has got one of the key systematic way to eradicate the cultural of Sindhi people, because of course it will bring migration. Not that we are not global, but we welcome the globalization, but at the same time, recognition of our own culture. It will bring migrant worker. We already have seen it, all these in mega projects. Only less than 1% are local people are employed. 90% and 95% actually, the people on these projects are brought from other states or other even countries or more Chinese. At the moment, I'll give you one example. In Karachi, we have a waste collector Chinese people. We have a poor country in Pakistan and Karachi. Can't we find a waste collector, a local employee, rather than bringing Chinese? So there's one example that how the mass migration will bring and dilute the whole population demography. And on the other hand, our local indigenous people are looking for jobs. There is no job creation, there's no job safeguard. So that's one aspect of the CPEC. The second is the economic issues, right? We have borrowed, or Pakistan has actually borrowed more than $60 billion worth of. Do we know, is that a loan or there's a debt? Who is going to pay this debt? Is my generation or my grandchildren or our people's grandchildren will pay off this debt of $62 billion? So it's an economic catastrophe for the people, and I would call it economic slavery of Sindhi people through the CPEC project.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Let's move to Bangladesh, which has been facing one of the worst refugee crises in decades. Hundreds of thousands of Rohingyas from Myanmar have taken refuge in parts of Bangladesh. United Nations and other aid agencies are scrambling to give people shelter and prevent an outbreak of disease. We have a report.
Bodies of 13 Rohingya refugees, including those of 8 children, washed up on Inani beach in Bangladesh after a boat carrying 130 Rohingya refugees fleeing violence in Myanmar capsized. For the past several nights, boatmen have been using the low tide to ferry Rohingya Muslims at night to avoid encounters with the Myanmar military. At the same time, Life has become tormenting for the people who are living in the camps. Aid agencies in Bangladesh have struggled to provide help to more than 400,000 Rohingya refugees who have fled a military offensive. Meanwhile, Recep Agdag visited the Kutapalong camp in Cox's Bazar, where he told local officials Turkey will provide the refugees with the shelters.
So we are ready to support you. We are ready to help you and the Rohingya people who fled here. We've already planned to make the shelter for at least, mid-term shelter, at least 100,000 Rohingya people.
So far, aid has come in from countries such as Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, and Indonesia. India sent clothes and dry fruits. 2 ships from China are on the way. Turkey's Red Crescent has brought aid, and there are also various arms of the United Nations.
And the first food is going to the people who really need it the most, the elderly women, the children, some people who are, I don't want to use a technical term of malnourished, but the people who really just have been walking for 10 days, 15 days, 6 days, and they really need some urgent feeding. Some of the food is being provided by refugees themselves, so clearly food is not enough.
But officials preparing for an uncertain future say they need much more. They face a logistical hurdle. They need to build warehouses to store relief material, regulate aid distribution channels, build roads and electric infrastructure, and set up shelters to house families. The Inter-Sector Coordination Group, which produces regular situation reports from Cox's Bazar, estimated in its latest report that over 106,000 children were without education services. 429,000 people required food and 470,000 people did not have shelter. Some 480,000 Rohingya have fled northern Rakhine since August 25th and accused the army of a campaign of violence that the UN has called ethnic cleansing, following attacks by Rohingya insurgents on police posts. Myanmar has said about half of Rohingya villages have been abandoned, but blames insurgents of the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army for attacking civilians.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has termed the situation as world's fastest developing refugee emergency and human rights nightmare. Now I take your leave with the celebrations of Navratri festival in India's Gujarat state. Goodbye and take care.